Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at emotional intelligence. And specifically, we're going to be pulling some fascinating excerpts from Daniel Goleman's book,
Oh, cool.
Emotional Intelligence. So you know how we always hear about like IQ being like the measure of intelligence?
Right. Yeah.
What if there's like another type of intelligence that's just as important?
Mm.
One that helps us, understand and manage our emotions?
Right.
That's what we're going to be exploring today.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. We focus so much on that like head side of intelligence,
Right.
like the logical, analytical thinking.
Yeah.
Those IQ tests measure.
Mm.
Goleman's arguing there's this whole other dimension,
Yeah.
like the heart side,
Right.
and that's all about emotional intelligence.
Yeah, so it's not like throwing IQ out the window. It's more like there's this whole other set of skills that's also really important.
Yeah.
Maybe even more important for how our lives actually turn out.
Exact. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone who's like super brilliant academically,
Oh, yeah.
but they struggle in like relationships, or they even sabotage their own success?
Totally.
Goleman connects those dots
Mm.
between like a lack of emotional intelligence
Mm.
and some pretty serious real-world consequence.
Oh, wow. So it really does make you wonder if we've been like
Right.
prioritizing the wrong kind of smart all along.
Yeah.
So, okay, what exactly is emotional intelligence?
Well,
What are the signs that someone's got it?
it's like a blend of different qualities.
Okay.
Like self-awareness,
Mhm.
empathy, motivation, social skills.
Mm.
So it's not just about understanding your own emotions, but it's also about knowing how to manage them.
Okay.
But then it's also about recognizing, how other people are feeling.
Right.
And how to like navigate social situations effectively.
I see. It's like you can be a genius at like,
Right.
solving these complex equations or whatever.
Exactly.
But if you can't read a room or you can't understand why your partner's upset, that genius might not get you very far in life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right.
And what's really interesting is like Goleman talks about this
Right.
this fascinating interplay between the rational mind and the emotional mind.
Yeah.
He uses the analogy of heart versus head.
Okay.
And sometimes those two are in direct conflict with each other.
Oh, tell me about it. We've all had those moments where our emotions just take
Yeah.
over and we say or do something we totally regret.
Totally.
Is that kind of what he's talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly what he's talking about.
Okay.
And to understand this, we kind of have to dive a little bit into the neuroscience of it all.
Mm.
There's this part of the brain called the amygdala
Okay.
that plays like a key role in processing emotions.
Okay.
Now, the amygdala is wired to react like really quickly, especially to potential threats.
So it's like our internal alarm system
Exactly.
going off before we even have time to think things through.
Exactly. And sometimes this can lead to what Goleman calls an amygdala hijack.
Interesting.
So it's like your emotions take the wheel and your rational mind gets tossed in the trunk.
Oh, wow.
Goleman gives a really chilling example
Yeah.
of Richard Robles, this bus driver,
Yeah.
who reacted in just like pure rage
Rah.
and committed what became known as like the career girl murders. And this illustrates like the really extreme end of what an emotional hijack can look like.
Yeah, that is a chilling example of what can happen when emotions spiral out of control.
Right.
So, like, what's the antidote to this amygdala hijack?
Well,
How do we, like, prevent our emotions from leading us down these wrong paths?
Well, the good news is we're not just slaves to our amygdala.
Okay.
There's another part of the brain called the neocortex that's involved in like higher level thinking and planning.
Okay.
You can think of the left prefrontal lobe of the neocortex as like this neural thermostat
Okay.
that helps to like regulate those intense emotional responses.
So it's like a battle between
Yeah.
our impulsive emotional side and our more rational, thoughtful side.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
And this is where like self-awareness and self-regulation become like
Right.
crucial components of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
It's about being able to recognize our emotions as they're happening
Okay.
and then choosing how we respond instead of
Mhm.
just being like swept away by them.
I see. Okay, so that makes sense. But how do we actually
Right.
get better at recognizing our emotions in the first place? Is it like something we're born with, or can we actually learn to become
Yeah.
more self-aware?
Goleman argues that self-awareness is like the foundation
Okay.
of emotional intelligence.
Mm.
And luckily, it's a skill that can be developed, but it's
Right.
not always easy.
Right.
Some people struggle with a condition called alexithymia,
Okay.
which is basically the inability to recognize and verbalize emotions.
Hmm.
Imagine trying to navigate this complex world, but you can't understand your own internal compass.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds really challenging.
It is.
So how can someone improve their self-awareness? What are some practical steps they can take?
One simple yet powerful technique is to start paying attention to your body.
Hmm.
Our emotions often manifest physically.
Mm.
You might notice a tightness in your chest when you're anxious,
Yeah.
or a clenching of your fists when you're angry,
I see.
things like that.
It's like tuning into those subtle cues
Yeah,
that our bodies are sending us all this time.
exactly.
Right? Instead of just brushing them off, we start paying attention
Right.
to what they're trying to tell us.
Exactly. And once you start noticing those physical sensations,
Hmm.
try to label the emotion you're experiencing.
Okay.
Is it sadness? Is it joy? Is it frustration?
Right.
That simple act of naming your emotions
Hmm.
can actually make them less overwhelming,
Hmm.
and it can help you gain more control over them.
Okay, so it's like shining a light on these shadowy feelings
Right.
and giving them a name.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But what about those times when we know we're feeling something strong, but we just can't seem to stop it?
Yeah.
Like, how do we actually manage these intense emotions?
Well, this is where self-regulation comes in.
Okay.
Goleman talks about this fascinating study called the marshmallow test,
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this.
where researchers basically gave children a choice.
Okay.
Eat one marshmallow now or wait and get two later.
Okay.
It turns out that those kids who were able to delay gratification
Right.
and wait for that second marshmallow,
Mm.
they ended up having higher SAT scores later in life,
Wow.
and they were less likely to get into trouble.
Really?
Yeah.
So even small exercises in delaying gratification
Yeah,
can have a big impact on our long-term success.
exactly. And, the ability to delay gratification,
Right.
to resist those immediate impulses, that's a key aspect
Mm-hmm.
of emotional self-regulation.
Okay.
It's like building a muscle.
Mm.
The more you practice it, the stronger it gets.
That makes me think about all the times I've caved to an impulse buy online or
Yes.
snapped at someone when I was stressed. Maybe I need to work on my marshmallow muscle.
Maybe.
But speaking of stress and those intense emotions,
Mhm.
Goleman doesn't shy away from talking about
Yeah.
the negative impact they can have.
Right.
He talks about how anxiety and anger can really mess with our thinking
Exactly.
and our performance.
Strong emotions can be powerful distractions,
Mm.
and they could really sabotage our ability to think clearly and make good decisions.
Yeah.
Think about a time when you were super anxious about
Right.
an exam or a presentation.
Yeah.
Did you find it harder to focus or remember information?
Oh, absolutely. I remember this one college exam where I was so anxious
Oh, yeah.
that my mind just went completely blank.
Wow.
I knew the material, but the anxiety just blocked my thinking.
hmm
Totally.
It's a common experience, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it illustrates Goleman's point
Okay.
that when we're in the grip of these strong negative emotions,
Mm-hmm.
our cognitive functions, like memory and decision-making, they take a hit. It's like our brain is so focused on this perceived threat that it can't access its full potential.
I see. So what's the solution?
Well,
Do we just have to avoid stressful situations altogether?
that's not realistic. And
Okay.
it's definitely not the message Goleman is conveying.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing the power of those negative emotions.
Right.
And developing strategies to manage them effectively.
Okay.
And that's something we'll dive into a little bit further
Yeah.
as we continue this deep dive.
Okay, this is fascinating stuff.
Right.
We've covered a lot of ground already,
We have.
from the neuroscience of emotions to the impact of emotional intelligence
Right.
on our decision-making and performance.
Yeah.
But before we move on,
Okay.
I'm curious to hear more about the upside of emotions.
Okay.
Goleman also talks about the power of positive emotions,
It does.
like hope and optimism, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he makes a really important distinction.
Okay.
Hope is not just wishful thinking. It's about believing in your ability to achieve your goals,
Okay.
having a plan, and being motivated to take action.
So it's a more active and empowering emotion
Yeah,
than just passively hoping for the best.
exactly. And research has shown that optimism can actually act as a buffer against depression.
Wow.
And it can even improve academic performance.
That makes a lot of sense, you know?
Right.
When you're feeling optimistic, you're more likely to approach challenges with a can-do attitude, and that can lead to better outcomes.
Yeah.
But one thing that really stood out to me in the book was the emphasis on empathy.
Yeah.
Goleman makes a strong case for it.
He
being
does.
like a cornerstone of emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
Uh,
He even delves into like the biological basis for empathy,
okay.
talking about these fascinating things called mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons, what are those?
Brain, yeah.
Is that why I sometimes cringe when I see someone else get hurt?
It could be.
Okay.
Mirror neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action.
Okay.
So it's like our brains are wired to understand and share the feelings of others
Wow.
on a very deep level.
So it's like our brains are trying to
Yeah.
bridge the gap between ourselves and other people,
Right.
allowing us to tap into their experiences.
Exactly. And this brings us to like another fascinating anecdote from
Yeah.
the book.
Okay.
Goleman talks about the attack on figure skater Nancy Kerrigan.
Right.
The attacker, Shane Stant, was like initially cold and remorseless. But then after seeing Kerrigan crying on television,
Right.
he was like overcome with remorse and confessed to the crime.
Wow, that's a powerful example of how empathy can even lead to a change of heart in someone who has committed a terrible act.
Yeah.
It's like seeing someone else's pain just triggers this sense of shared humanity.
Yeah.
Reminding us that we're all connected.
Precisely. And this connection, this ability to empathize with others, is essential for building healthy and fulfilling relationships.
And speaking of relationships, Goleman dives deep into how emotional intelligence is.
He does.
Crucial for building strong and lasting connections.
Yeah.
Especially in marriages, right?
He does. In fact, he discusses John Gottman's research,
Okay.
which identifies what Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of relationship breakdown.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. These are basically communication patterns that can create a toxic environment and just erode the foundation of a relationship.
Yeah, they sound like recipes for disaster.
They do.
But how does emotional intelligence help us avoid falling into those patterns?
Well, first and foremost, it's about being aware of these patterns and understanding their impact. Emotional intelligence helps us recognize when we're slipping into criticism or defensiveness, and it gives us the tools to communicate more effectively.
So it's about catching ourselves before we say something hurtful and choosing a more constructive way to express our feelings.
Exactly. And Goleman also talks about the concept of flooding during arguments.
Okay.
Where one partner becomes so overwhelmed by negative emotions that they either shut down or lash out.
Oh, I've totally been there.
Right?
It's like your body goes into fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
And rational thought just goes out the window.
Precisely. And Goleman emphasizes the importance of recognizing the signs of flooding in yourself and your partner and taking steps to de-escalate the situation before it spirals out of control.
So like taking a break, calming down, and then coming back to the conversation.
Exactly.
When you're both feeling more grounded.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the workplace. Goleman makes a strong case for why emotional intelligence is becoming increasingly important in the professional world.
You know, it's funny. We often think about success in the workplace as being all about like technical skills and IQ. Right.
But Goleman seemed to be suggesting that those things aren't enough anymore.
That's right. In today's world, the ability to navigate complex social dynamics, communicate, effectively build strong relationships is becoming increasingly crucial.
Yeah.
Think about it. You could be the most brilliant engineer or programmer in the world.
Okay.
But if you can't work effectively in a team or communicate your ideas clearly, your potential might be limited.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So what are some of the key emotional skills that can help us thrive in the workplace?
One of the most important skills Goleman highlights is the ability to give and receive criticism constructively.
Okay.
Think about a time when you received feedback that was like harsh or poorly delivered.
Yeah.
How did it make you feel?
Honestly, it usually makes me feel defensive.
Right.
Even if I know the feedback is valid. It's like my ego gets in the way of really hearing what the other person is trying to tell me. That's a common reaction.
Yeah.
But Goleman argues that with emotional intelligence, we can learn to see feedback, even negative feedback, as an opportunity for growth. It's about being able to detach from our ego and focus on the message, not the messenger.
So it's about shifting our perspective from seeing feedback as a personal attack to seeing it as a chance to learn and improve.
Exactly. And Goleman shares a really interesting story about this engineer who was constantly being demoralized by this sarcastic vice president.
Oh, wow.
This engineer decided to, like, directly address the issue with the VP,
Okay.
explaining the impact of his words. And guess what?
What happened? Did the VP get defensive?
Actually, no.
Really?
The vice president apologized and actually changed his behavior.
Wow.
It's a powerful example of how directly addressing an issue with emotional intelligence
Right.
can lead to positive change, even in like a hierarchical setting.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
It is.
It shows that even in challenging work environments, we have the power to make things better
Yeah.
by communicating with empathy and understanding.
Exactly. And this brings us to another
Okay.
critical area that Goleman explores,
Mm.
the fascinating connection between our minds and our bodies.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
We've talked about the brain and emotions,
Hmm.
but how does our physical health fit into all of this?
Well, for centuries, Western medicine operated under the assumption that the mind and body were like separate entities,
Right.
each functioning independently.
Yeah.
But Goleman highlights some groundbreaking research
Okay.
that challenges this traditional view.
So it's not just our thoughts and emotions that impact our health.
Right.
It's a two-way street.
Exactly. Our emotions can influence our physical well-being
Mm.
just as much as our physical health can impact our emotional state.
Okay.
And this is something we'll explore in more depth
Yeah.
in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to it. It's funny how we often think about our minds and bodies as being separate, but what if they're more intertwined than we realize? You left us hanging with this idea that our emotions can actually impact our physical health. I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's one of the most fascinating aspects of emotional intelligence, this mind-body connection. For a long time, Western medicine treated the mind and body as totally separate, like two ships passing in the night. But Goleman highlights some groundbreaking research that completely flips that idea on its head.
Okay, so tell me more about this research. What kind of evidence are we talking about?
Well, Goleman talks about this researcher named Robert Ader, who was studying taste aversion in rats. He stumbled upon something incredible, this connection between the immune system, which fights off disease, and the nervous system, which controls our thoughts and emotions.
Wait, so he's saying that our thoughts and feelings can actually influence how well our immune system works.
Exactly. Ader's work was a real paradigm shift. It showed that conditioning a psychological process could have a direct impact on the immune response, a physiological process. It was one of the first glimpses into this intricate web of connections between our brains, our immune systems, and our endocrine systems, which produce hormones.
This is blowing my mind a little. So what are the implications of this? Does this mean that if I'm constantly stressed or anxious, I'm more likely to get sick?
There's definitely a strong correlation. Goleman dives into the research on chronic stress, anxiety, and depression, and the impact these emotional states can have on our physical health. Think about it this way. When we're under chronic stress, our bodies pump out hormones like cortisol.
Cortisol, the stress hormone, right? I've
Right.
heard it's not exactly our friend.
Right, short bursts of cortisol can be helpful, but when it's constantly elevated, it can wreak havoc on our bodies. It can weaken our immune systems, disrupt our sleep, and even impair our cognitive function. It's like having your foot on the gas pedal all the time. Eventually, something's going to give.
So chronic stress is like a slow burn that can eventually lead to serious health problems. What about other negative emotions, like anger? Does Goleman talk about that?
He does, and he presents some pretty compelling evidence linking anger to heart disease. One study he cites found that people who are prone to anger are at a significantly higher risk of having a heart attack. It's like those bursts of anger are putting extra strain on our cardiovascular system, leading to wear and tear over time.
You know, this makes me think about that old idea of the type A personality. Those hard-driving, competitive individuals who are always stressed out and in a hurry. There used to be a lot of talk about them being at higher risk for heart disease.
And while the type A personality theory has evolved over time, the core idea still holds true. Our personality traits, our habitual ways of thinking and feeling can have a real impact on our physical health.
So it's not just about what we eat and how much we exercise. Our emotional well-being is a crucial part of the equation.
Precisely. Goleman isn't suggesting that we should all try to be happy all the time to avoid getting sick. It's more nuanced than that. It's about recognizing that our emotional health is an integral part of our overall health, and that taking care of our emotional well-being is just as important as taking care of our physical bodies.
That's a powerful message, and it really underscores the importance of understanding and managing our emotions. But, you know, one thing I've been thinking about is the role of emotional intelligence in raising the next generation. I'm curious to know if Goleman talks about that.
He does. And he makes a strong case for why teaching emotional intelligence to children is crucial starting from a young age. He goes beyond simply saying that we should teach kids about emotions. He talks about the power of emotional literacy.
Okay, what's the difference between just teaching about emotions and teaching emotional literacy?
Think of it this way. Knowing the names of different emotions is just the first step. Emotional literacy goes deeper. It's about understanding how emotions work, how they influence our thoughts and behaviors, and how to manage them effectively. It's like giving children a toolkit for navigating the emotional ups and downs of life.
That's a great analogy. It's like we're not just teaching them the alphabet of emotions, we're teaching them how to write stories with those emotions.
Exactly. And Goleman argues that this education should start early at home and in schools. He discusses different parenting styles and highlights the benefits of what he calls the emotion coaching style.
What does that look like?
It's about creating a safe and supportive environment where children feel comfortable expressing their emotions. Instead of dismissing or punishing a child's anger or sadness, emotion coaching parents help their children understand and label those feelings, teach them coping mechanisms, and help them develop strategies for problem solving.
So it's like teaching them to be scientists of their own emotions, to observe, analyze, and experiment with different ways of managing those feelings.
Precisely. And Goleman highlights some promising research on the benefits of emotional literacy programs in schools. He talks about programs like Self-Science and the Resolving Conflict Creatively program, which been shown to have a positive impact on children's social and emotional skills, reduce aggression, and even boost academic performance.
So teaching emotional intelligence can actually make a difference in children's lives, both inside and outside the classroom.
The evidence is compelling. It suggests that by equipping children with emotional literacy skills, we're not just setting them up for success academically and professionally, but we're also helping them develop into more resilient, empathetic, and well-rounded human beings.
That's such a powerful message. It makes you wonder why emotional intelligence isn't a core subject in every school curriculum.
I agree. It's definitely a topic that deserves more attention and investment. But, it's not just about formal education. We can all continue to learn and grow our emotional intelligence throughout our lives.
That's reassuring because I know I didn't have access to these kinds of programs when I was growing up. So you're saying it's not too late for me to work on my own emotional intelligence?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's never too late.
Yeah.
Our brains are remarkably adaptable, and we can continue to learn and grow throughout our lives. And that brings us to the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some practical steps we can take to cultivate our emotional intelligence.
So we've explored the science behind emotions.
Right.
And we've talked about their impact on our relationships, our work, even our physical health. But now for the part I'm really excited about.
Okay.
What can we actually do about all of this?
Yeah.
How do we put this knowledge into practice and become more emotionally intelligent?
Well, I think it's important to start by acknowledging that there's no magic formula
Right.
or quick fix.
Yeah.
Developing emotional intelligence is an ongoing journey, not a destination.
Okay.
It's about continuous learning practice and self-reflection.
So it's like building any other skill.
Right.
It takes time and effort and a willingness to keep learning and growing.
Exactly.
But where do we even begin? What are some practical steps we can take?
Goleman emphasizes that self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence.
Okay.
You can't change what you don't acknowledge, right?
Right. It's like trying to navigate a maze in the dark.
Exactly.
You need some light to see where you're going.
Right. So start by paying attention to your emotions
Okay.
as they arise throughout the day. Notice the physical sensations,
Okay.
the thoughts, and the behavioral urges
Yeah.
that accompany different feelings.
So instead of just reacting on autopilot,
Right.
we start to become more mindful of what's happening inside of us?
Yeah, it's like becoming an observer of your own inner world.
Okay. And it's important to approach this observation with curiosity and non-judgment.
Right.
Don't beat yourself up for feeling angry or anxious.
Exactly.
Just notice those feelings, acknowledge them, and try to understand what might be triggering them. Okay, that makes sense. But what about those times when we're feeling overwhelmed by a strong emotion? How do we actually manage those feelings
Yeah.
in a way that's healthy and constructive?
This is where self-regulation comes in.
Okay.
And Goleman offers several techniques that we can use.
Hmm.
One is relaxation.
Okay.
It might sound simple,
Right.
but something as basic as taking a few deep breaths
Yeah.
can help to calm your nervous system and create a little space between you and that intense emotion.
I've heard about that. It's like hitting the pause button on your emotional reaction.
Exactly.
So you can choose a more thoughtful response.
Exactly. Another technique is cognitive reframing.
Okay.
This involves challenging the thoughts that are fueling those negative emotions. For example, if you find yourself getting anxious about an upcoming presentation,
Right.
you might ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen?
Okay.
Often our fears are much bigger in our minds than they are in reality.
Yeah, it's like we're creating these stories in our heads that are amplifying our anxiety.
Exactly. And sometimes those stories aren't even true.
Right.
Cognitive reframing helps us to challenge those negative thoughts
Okay.
and replace them with more balanced and realistic ones.
That makes sense. So we've talked about self-awareness and self-regulation.
Right.
What about empathy? How do we become better at understanding and sharing the feelings of others?
Empathy is truly the heart of emotional intelligence. And it's a skill we can cultivate through practice.
Okay.
One of the most effective ways to build empathy is through active listening.
What does that look like?
It's about really tuning in to what the other person is saying,
Okay.
both verbally and non-verbally.
Mm.
Put away your phone, make eye contact,
Right.
and focus on truly understanding their perspective,
Yeah.
even if you don't agree with it.
So it's about stepping outside of our own bubble and trying to see the world through their eyes.
Exactly. And sometimes it's helpful to ask clarifying questions to make sure you're understanding their message.
Right.
This shows that you're truly engaged and that you care about what they have to say.
It's not just about passively hearing their words.
Right.
It's about actively seeking to understand their experience.
Exactly. And another key component of empathy is perspective taking.
Okay.
This involves consciously trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and imagine how they might be feeling.
That's so important because we often judge others based on our own assumptions and experiences without considering their unique circumstances.
Exactly. Perspective taking helps us to challenge those assumptions
Right.
and cultivate a more compassionate and understanding approach to our interactions with others.
This is reminding me of something you said earlier about how emotional intelligence isn't about suppressing our emotions or avoiding conflict.
Right.
It's about understanding and managing those emotions in a way that allows us to navigate challenges effectively and build stronger relationships.
And that brings us to the fourth key area of emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Social skills. This encompasses a wide range of abilities,
Okay.
from communication and conflict resolution to teamwork and leadership.
So it's about how we interact with others and how we navigate those social dynamics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Goleman emphasizes the importance of being able to express yourself clearly and assertively,
Okay.
resolving disagreements constructively, and influencing others in a positive way.
I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially when it comes to conflict.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in our own emotions and react in a way that escalates the situation.
Yeah, it is. And that's why emotional intelligence is so crucial.
Right.
It gives us the tools to stay calm under pressure, to communicate our needs effectively,
Okay.
and to find win-win solutions that work for everyone involved.
So it's not about winning or losing.
Right.
It's about finding a way forward that respects everyone's perspectives and needs.
Exactly. And this is where skills like active listening, empathy, and assertive communication all come together to create a more harmonious and productive social environment.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground, from the neuroscience of emotions
Correct.
to the practical steps we can take to cultivate our own emotional intelligence.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
And for you listening, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about emotional intelligence and its potential to transform your life. Remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And every step you take toward greater self-awareness, empathy, and compassion is a step toward a more fulfilling and meaningful life.